Why was her hand shaking? Not from the cold, not from fear, at least not the kind anyone else could see. He noticed it first, the way her rifle strap trembled against her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. "Why are you trembling?" he asked quietly, almost kindly. But her answer was something no one dared to hear. The hangar was alive with noise. Engines whining, boots striking steel grates, radios spitting coded bursts. Yet around her sound faded into something else, like water muffling the world after you've sunk too deep. She adjusted her gear, checked the buckle twice, then checked it again. Routine was her shield. Repetition her silence. They called her by her call sign, short, sharp, stripped of identity. But beneath the helmet, beneath the hardened jaw and steady gaze, there was something fraying. A thread no one had tugged at yet. She didn't answer him, not then. Instead, she looked away, focusing on the flight manifest pinned to the bulkhead. Her name was there, the mission was there. But what wasn't on paper, what no one else knew, was why she'd volunteered for this run when she could have stayed behind. The night before, she'd written a letter, not long, just a page, folded neatly, tucked inside the lining of her pack, not for command, not for history, for one person only. And she prayed that letter would never need to be read. Someone cracked a joke across the hangar, the kind of dark humor that keeps soldiers breathing when the silence grows too heavy. She forced a half-smile, but inside, the words of that letter pressed like a stone against her chest. No one knew. Not yet. The C-130's ramp groaned open, swallowing them in red light. Inside, the air was sharp with oil and steel, thick with the musk of gear worn too many times. She climbed aboard with the others, keeping her eyes on the ground. One step, then another, always forward. The crew chief barked positions, but it was muscle memory. Everyone knew where they belonged. Belonging was what kept the edges from unraveling. She slid onto the bench, rifle across her lap, helmet resting against the steel wall. The man who had noticed her trembling sat across from her. His eyes lingered, but he didn't press. Soldiers learned quickly when to ask and when to let silence carry its own weight. He busied himself with straps and gloves, but she knew he'd file it away. Soldiers notice things like that. The engines roared to life. Vibrations rattled through the fuselage, shaking teeth and bones. For some, it was a comforting rhythm. For her, it was a reminder of something else. Another night, another flight, one that hadn't ended the way it was supposed to. She closed her eyes, willing the memory back into its box. Not now, not here. But boxes break. And memories, they bleed through. 2 rows down, a younger soldier leaned in, whispering to his buddy. "You ever think about what happens if—" His voice cracked with the weight of words too heavy. "Don't," the other cut him off. "Not tonight." The younger one swallowed hard, then nodded, but his hands betrayed him, tapping nervously against his rifle, and a rhythmic beat no one could ignore. She saw it, she knew that feeling, and for a moment she wanted to lean over, tell him it was okay to feel afraid, but she didn't, because fear had no room here, not when eyes were watching, not when silence was its own armor. The plane lifted, a jolt, then weightlessness for a split second. Someone muttered a prayer under their breath. Someone else pressed earbuds in, drowning out reality with a song too personal to share. Every soldier had their ritual. Every soldier had their ghosts. She had both. The letter pressed again against her ribs, a reminder, a burden, a promise. Time inside the belly of a transport feels elastic. Minutes stretch, snap, coil back. No clocks, just the drone of engines and the thrum of anticipation. She counted breaths, not seconds. Each inhale, each exhale measured. She had learned long ago that control was built in small increments. A steady rhythm kept panic at bay. But even steady rhythms can fracture. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw her brother. Not in uniform, not on any mission, just the way he looked on the last day she saw him, laughing in the kitchen, his hands still smelling of machine oil, teasing her about a childhood nickname she thought she'd outgrown. She had promised she'd be home for his birthday. She was. Instead, she was here, strapped into a steel bird cutting through night skis toward a war that never seemed to end. And that promise, broken, unspoken, haunted her more than the enemy ever could. She shifted against the bench, eyes snapping open. Not now. She couldn't afford to go there now. Across from her, the man who had asked her the question, why she trembled, leaned forward just slightly like he wanted to say something. He didn't. Instead, he adjusted his gloves again. Sometimes silence between soldiers wasn't avoidance. Sometimes it was respect. The red light bathed them all in ghostly glow. Sweat glistened, rifles gleamed, eyes darted. The crew chief held up a hand 5 minutes out. The cabin tightened. You could feel it. The way breaths shortened. The way hands gripped metal tighter. Even the music leaking from earbuds cut off. She exhaled slowly. Her lips moved but no sound came. Words she kept only for herself. Not prayer, not mantra, just memory. The trembling started again, just enough that her fingers betrayed her. She tried to still them, clenching hard, but he noticed again. His voice carried through the engine hum, low, almost lost in the storm of sound. "You sure you're okay?" She didn't answer. Couldn't, because the truth, her truth, wasn't something you said before a mission. It wasn't something you said at all. Her truth was folded paper in her pack. Her truth was a name written on the top line. Her truth was what no one dared to hear. The green light snapped on. The ramp groaned again. The storm of wind screamed into the cabin. And just like that, the question was buried beneath the rush of movement, the discipline of training, the blur of boots pounding steel and bodies leaping into night air. She was the last to rise, the last to check her harness, the last to step into the torrent of darkness. As she moved toward the ramp, she whispered, barely audible, meant only for herself. "Please, let them never find that letter." And then, she was gone. What did the earth feel like when you hit it at that speed? The answer was always the same, hard, unyielding, waiting to break someone. She hit the ground with a thud that rattled her bones, rolled, rose to one knee and froze. Silence pressed in heavy, swallowing the roar of the plane that had already vanished into the night. Her breath echoed in her helmet, too loud, too fast. She willed it steady. Counted. Inhale, hold, exhale. The night air bit cold against her skin where the mask didn't seal. Sweat cooled instantly, trickling down the back of her neck. Shapes moved in the darkness, shadows with rifles. Her team. No words spoken, just hand signals. They melted into the terrain, a line of ghosts threading through grass slick with dew. She followed, boots crunching softly against soil that smelled of iron and damp. Every step reminded her of something, of training yards, of whispered instructions, of a voice that once told her she had the eyes of someone who saw more than she wanted. That voice belonged to her brother. The memory tightened in her chest again. The team leader raised a fist. They dropped low. She mirrored the motion, rifle pressed against her shoulder, eyes scanning. The night was alive with tiny sounds, crickets, wind scraping across stone, the faint growl of a generator somewhere distant. Then came the whisper through comms, "Clear path, move." She obeyed, always forward, one step, then another. But her mind wasn't silent. It never was. She remembered the last time she'd landed on soil like this. Different mission, different country, same fear disguised as focus. That night one mistake had cost them, a mistake she had buried deep but never deep enough. She shook her head as if it would clear the thought away. Not now, focus. The terrain shifted, rocks, broken walls, the skeletons of buildings left behind by people who fled long before war arrived. She stepped over rubble, careful not to dislodge loose stone. Dust hung in the air, catching faint moonlight like a ghost refusing to leave. The younger soldier from the plane, the one tapping nervously, moved just ahead of her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid way he scanned left, then right, like if he blinked, something would appear. He was too tense, too loud in his silence. She whispered into comms, barely a breath. Steady, shoulders loose. He startled slightly, then nodded, though she doubted he realized he'd nodded in the dark. His pace softened, steps lighter. She said nothing more. Sometimes one quiet reminder was enough. She wished someone had given her one the first time she was out here. Instead, she'd learned by losing. The line halted again. This time it wasn't routine. The leader knelt, scanning something through his scope. A flick of fingers signaled, "Watch." And there it was, movement just ahead, figures too many to count from here. Lights flickering, voices carried on wind. She felt her stomach clench. They weren't supposed to be this close yet. The map had been wrong, or the enemy had shifted. Either way, the line between them had shortened too soon. Her hand trembled again, barely, as she adjusted her rifle. Not enough for anyone to notice. Not yet. The leader gave new signals, detour left, stay low, circle wide. The line shifted, ghost-like, sliding into shadows. She followed. She always followed. But as she moved, her boot pressed against something brittle. A crack, too loud. The sound cut the night like a blade. The figures ahead froze, voices hushed. A flashlight beam slashed across rubble. Her heart pounded in her throat. She pressed herself low, body flat against cold earth, the smell of dirt filling her lungs. The beam swept once, twice, then lingered, too close. Her finger tightened against the trigger, but the leader's hand's signal cut sharp. Hold, do not fire, not yet. Seconds stretched, a test of nerves, a test of silence. Then the beam flicked away. Voices rose again, dismissive. The enemy didn't come closer. She closed her eyes for one beat, then moved again, slowly, carefully. Hours bled together. Distance carried them away from noise, deeper into ruins, toward their objective. The mission brief had been simple on paper. Mark coordinates, confirm target, signal command. But paper never captured the weight of what missions truly meant. Because it wasn't just coordinates. It was lives. Theirs. Theirs and others who would never know her name, never know she was here, walking through night with a letter in her pack. At one pause, crouched behind broken stone, the younger soldier leaned toward her, whispering just above silence. "Why'd you join? You don't seem like the type." She glanced at him. His face was pale in the moonlight, eyes wide, voice carrying the edge of someone too new to this kind of soil. She wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered back, "No one seems like the type until they have a reason." He blinked like he hadn't expected an answer. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. Maybe he heard the weight in her tone. Maybe he understood there was more she wouldn't say. Her reason wasn't for him to carry. They reached a ridge before dawn, the horizon faint with blue. The leader raised a fist, signaling stop. The team knelt, rifles scanning, eyes sharp. They waited. Waiting was as much part of the mission as moving. She sank against a rock, muscles aching from stillness more than motion. The cold pressed harder here, seeping through gear into bones. She adjusted her gloves, but her fingers still felt stiff. The man who had asked why she trembled slid down beside her. He didn't look at her, not directly. His eyes stayed on the horizon, scanning, but his voice carried, low enough only for her to hear. "Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, she wanted to believe him, to hand over the weight she had locked inside, let someone else hold it. But she couldn't, because her truth wasn't safe in another's hands. She said nothing. Silence was her only answer. The sky cracked pale. The ridge offered a view, valleys stretching, buildings below, smoke rising faint from chimneys. Somewhere in those shadows was their target. Somewhere down there, people were sleeping, unaware that strangers on a ridge watched their world through scopes. She raised her own glass cold against her brow. The lens sharpened the valley into detail. And there it was, what they'd come for. A structure too fortified for its size. Guards posted in patterns too rigid for civilians. A signal mast disguised as ruin. She adjusted focus, scanning, and then movement. A figure stepping out into weak dawn light. She froze. Not enemy, not armed, just a woman carrying water, younger than her. Her hair tied back in a way that reminded her. Her chest tightened. She lowered the scope, blinked hard. The younger soldier whispered, "What is it?" "Nothing," she murmured too quickly. "Keep scanning." But it wasn't nothing, because for one heartbeat, that woman's face had mirrored her own. The leader gave new orders. They would split. Half would circle east, half west. Two would stay as overwatch. She knew even before he spoke she'd be among those two. Her job was always the same, eyes from above, scope steady, finger ready, silence heavy. She didn't protest. She never did. She settled into position, rifle stretched across rock, body melting into earth. Her scope caught movements below, small, ordinary, human. People who didn't know strangers watched them. People who didn't know how close the line between living and not living was. Her hand trembled again, faint against the trigger guard. She pressed it still, focused, waited. The letter in her pack felt heavier than the rifle beneath her cheek. She wanted to reach back, touch it, remind herself of the words she had written, but she didn't. Not here, not now. Instead, she let her eye linger on the valley, the morning light painting ruins gold. And she whispered to herself, words that belonged only to silence. "Not yet, they don't need to know yet." And she breathed, and she waited. Because dawn had come, but her night wasn't over. What happens to a soldier when the waiting stretches too long? Not the firefights, not the chaos. That's easy compared to silence. It's the stillness that eats you alive. She lay pressed against rock, scope steady, body fused with earth, eyes locked on a valley that looked almost peaceful. The sun had climbed higher, washing ruins in pale light. From up here, it was easy to forget what this place was. Easy to imagine it was just another morning somewhere far away. But the rifles at her side said otherwise. Her partner in Overwatch, another sniper, shifted slightly, his breath fogging in the cold. He didn't speak. They rarely did. Communication was hand signals, short whispers, or nothing at all. He trusted her scope and she trusted his. That's how it worked. That's how it had to. Through her glass, the target building glared back like a secret refusing to stay hidden. Guards moved in rigid patrols. Civilians drifted past without looking up, without knowing how closely they were watched. She blinked against the strain in her eye, focused again. She told herself the same words she always did. Just the mission, nothing else. But she knew it wasn't true, not this time. Below, movement shifted. A small truck rattled up the road, its engine coughing. Men climbed down, carrying crates heavy enough to strain their arms. Too careful, too organized. Supplies that didn't belong to villagers. Supplies meant for something else. She whispered into comms. Activity at target, crates, marking coordinates. The leader's voice crackled back. Calm, controlled. Copy, hold position, confirm patterns. Hold, always hold. Patience was the sharpest weapon here. But as she steadied her scope again, her hand betrayed her. A faint tremble ran down her wrist into the rifle. She clenched her jaw, forced it still. The other sniper didn't notice, too focused on his own sector. But she felt it. Every time it came, she felt it like a truth clawing its way out of hiding. Her brother's face flickered in her mind again. The last message he'd sent her. Just one line, "Don't carry what isn't yours." She hadn't answered, and now she never would. The younger soldier's voice crackled faint over comms. Nervous, too loud. "How long we holding?" The leader cut him off sharp. "Long as it takes, keep your head." Silence fell again, but she imagined his face, tight jaw, restless eyes. She remembered being that new. The way every second felt like a year. The way you wanted something, anything to happen just to break the weight of waiting. She wanted to tell him the truth, that the waiting was the mission, that the silence was the fight, that learning to breathe inside the nothing was harder than pulling a trigger, but she stayed quiet. She always stayed quiet. Hours passed, the valley shifted with life. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children ran between walls, laughter faint on wind. Dogs barked at nothing. Ordinary sounds that pressed against the edge of her purpose, daring her to remember this wasn't just coordinates. These were people. And then, a shout. Sharp, angry. Her scope swung fast. Two guards dragging a man from a doorway. Civilian, hands bound. His wife followed, screaming, clutching at them until she was thrown to the ground. The man's face was bloodied before he even reached the road. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Every muscle in her body screamed to act, to end it, to stop what she saw. But the leader's voice hissed in her ear. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Stay on mission. Her breath caught in her throat. She forced her eye to stay on the glass even as the scene unfolded. The man beaten, the wife screaming, children pulled away by others, too small to understand but old enough to know fear. Her partner's jaw tightened. He didn't move his scope, didn't fire. Discipline was everything. Orders were everything. Her hand trembled again. And this time he noticed. The man beside her whispered low, almost not sound at all. You're shaking again. Why? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not with the weight pressing inside her chest, not with the letter folded against her ribs. The guards dragged the man inside the fortified building. The wife was left kneeling in dirt, hands clawing at the air as if her reach could pull him back. Her throat ached, her finger twitched, but she forced herself still, because if she broke now, if she gave in, it wasn't just her, it was everyone, the mission, the team. The leader's voice came again, calm, cold, mark complete, confirm signal at 2100. They weren't here to save one man. They were here to end something bigger. That was the truth she had to cling to, even if it tasted like ash in her mouth. The sun slid higher. Heat pressed down, baking rock, sucking moisture from lips. Sweat stung her eyes. The valley shimmered in haze. Still they waited, watching, counting. Her partner shifted again, rolling his shoulders. His voice, soft, almost thoughtful. First time I saw something like that, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. She didn't look at him, just whispered 3 nights. Yeah, a pause, a breath. Now it's just another notch that's worse. The words hung between them heavy. She wanted to say something, wanted to admit that she didn't sleep either. Not then, not now, but the silence wrapped tight around her throat again. Instead, she adjusted her scope, pretended the glass was all she saw. But she heard his words long after they faded. The younger soldier's voice came again, softer this time, almost to himself. My mom thinks I'm in training. I didn't tell her it was real, didn't tell her it was this. No one answered. They never did when someone slipped truth like that into comms, but she felt it, the raw edge of it. She thought of her own mother, how she had stopped asking questions after the first year, how silence had become their only language, how she never said the word proud anymore, only safe, and even that felt like a lie. The letter pressed against her ribs again. She almost reached for it, almost. But not yet. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long. The valley changed again. Guards doubled, crates moved, antennas angled skyward. The signal mast pulsed faint red, unseen to anyone who didn't know where to look. This was it, the real reason they were here. Not civilians, not patrols, this. The mast was feeding something bigger, and if it stayed, more lives than she could count would pay for it. The leader's voice cut through. Final confirmation, target verified, Overwatch signal in 5. She exhaled. Her finger brushed the trigger. Her partner adjusted his scope. Everything was ready. But her hand trembled again. Harder this time. enough that the rifle shifted offline. And the man beside her turned, eyes sharp. He whispered, almost demanding now, "Why are you trembling? Tell me." The question hung in air, heavier than orders, heavier than the mission. She froze. Words clawed at her throat, desperate to escape. But if she spoke them, if she told him, everything would change. She said nothing, the silence stretched. Then the leader's voice snapped again. "Overwatch signal now." Her fingers steadied. Her breath held. The trembling slowed, not gone, but buried deep. She forced the rifle into line. And with a sharp exhale, she gave the signal. Down in the valley, the mast lit briefly, an electronic mark. Somewhere far away, command saw it. Somewhere else, someone made decisions with that signal. She pulled back from the scope, the weight of it sinking in. Her chest felt hollow, as if the letter inside her pack had grown heavier, denser, pulling her down. Her partner leaned closer, voice low. "You're carrying something, I can see it. If you don't tell me, it's going to eat you alive." Her lips parted, she almost answered, almost, but instead. She whispered to herself, so faint he couldn't hear. "They'd never forgive me if I did." And she pressed her cheek back to the rifle, pretending the silence was enough. Why did the room fall so silent the moment she stepped inside? The echo of her boots against the concrete floor sounded louder than it should have, bouncing back at her like judgment. The others were already seated, maps spread, radios blinking faintly, faces bent in the glow of dim light. But when she walked in, every eye lifted. Some looked away just as quickly. Others lingered, not with warmth, but with the kind of stare that carried unspoken questions. She adjusted her sleeve, tugging it tighter, though the cold in the room wasn't the kind you could fight with fabric. She felt it in her chest, deep and heavy, like the weight of a stone that had been sitting there for years. She didn't want them to see her hands shake. Not here, not now. The commander cleared his throat. His voice was level but edged with fatigue. "This is the window. We have 36 hours. Intel's still fluid, but the longer we wait, the harder the extraction becomes." No one asked her if she was ready. No one had to. Readiness wasn't a choice here. It was the air they breathed, whether it burned their lungs or not. But as his words continued, her mind drifted. She wasn't seeing the maps, the shifting red lines, the satellite photos marked with enemy routes. She was hearing something else, an echo she had carried since the last mission. A voice, barely audible now but impossible to erase. A laugh cut short. A promise never fulfilled. She blinked, forcing herself back into the present. One of the men at the far end of the table shifted. He had that habit of tapping his boot when he grew restless. She knew his name, knew his story. His younger brother had enlisted too young, barely making it out of training. Now he carried that guilt like a second uniform. She had caught him staring at her once during downtime, as if wondering how someone so quiet could shoulder so much. He never asked. Neither did she. That silence between them was its own kind of respect. The commander's hand landed on the table. "We'll move in teams of 2, rotating eyes, quiet approach, no signals unless absolutely necessary." His gaze slid across the group, pausing briefly on her. "You'll anchor second perimeter." Her chest tightened. Anchor. She knew what that meant. It wasn't just a role, it was a test. To stay invisible yet steady. To hold when others faltered. To be the one they trusted to keep ground even when the ground itself gave way. When the meeting broke, the others filed out quickly. Gear straps clinked softly, boots scraping against the floor. She lingered. Not because she wanted to, but because leaving too fast would make the tremor inside her visible. She exhaled when the last one left, but she wasn't alone. The commander stood at the map still, hands on either side of the table, staring as though the images might change if he willed them. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You're quieter than usual." Her throat closed. She wanted to answer, but the words felt like they might betray her. He turned finally, his face marked by years of fatigue, scars of decisions he couldn't erase. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in something closer to concern. "Why are you trembling?" Her lips parted. She almost lied, almost said it was the cold or the weight of her gear or nothing at all. But lies, she had learned, only sank deeper inside, and once inside, they clawed their way out at the worst times. She lowered her gaze. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Because I know what happens if we fail." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, pressing, filling the space like smoke. She didn't elaborate. He didn't push. But in her chest, she carried the truth she hadn't dared to share with any of them. This mission wasn't just another operation. Somewhere beyond those red lines and shadowed maps was a face she had never forgotten, a face she had sworn she would see again. When she finally left the room, her hands had steadied. Not because the fear had gone, but because fear had finally found its shape. Outside, the night air bit against her skin. Somewhere beyond the compound walls, the world continued with its indifference. Families asleep, cities humming, lives untouched by the decisions made in quiet rooms like this. She envied them for a moment. Then she shouldered her rifle, tightening the strap until it pressed into her bone. There was no room left for envy, only for resolve. Still, as she walked toward her bunk, her mind whispered the same question it always did before a mission. Would she return as herself, or only as a shadow of what was left? And beneath that question, deeper still, something she had never spoken aloud. Would they forgive her if she did? What did it mean to walk into the dark knowing you might never walk out? That was the thought pressing against her chest as the convoy rolled out of the compound under a heavy sky. The engines hummed low, almost respectful, and the world beyond the windows blurred into streaks of dust and silence. She sat pressed against the side of the armored truck, eyes steady, breath measured. But inside, her pulse beat like a drum she couldn't quiet. No one in the truck spoke. That silence was its own language, a language of people who had carried too much, seen too much, and understood what silence spared them from saying. The man across from her, the one with the tapping boot, held his rifle across his lap, but his thumb brushed the worn strap as if it were a rosary. She knew he wasn't religious. It wasn't prayer. It was memory. She recognized it because she did the same, only hers was smaller, hidden deep in her pocket. A folded scrap of paper with faded ink, words she could not bring herself to read again, but words she would not throw away. The convoy stopped without warning. The brakes hissed, jolting them forward. Her hand instinctively found her weapon, but the driver's voice came through the radio. "Checkpoint. Hold position." A breath held, a breath released. The others glanced around, waiting for orders. She glanced at the shadows outside. The night was not empty. She could feel it pressing against the thin metal walls, watching, listening. Every silence had weight, and this one felt heavier than most. She remembered the commander's question. Why was she trembling? She had given him an answer, but not the whole one. The truth lived deeper, layered beneath years of silence. The truth was this mission wasn't only about extraction or perimeters or holding ground. It was about someone left behind, someone she had carried in her chest every step since. Her mind replayed the last time she had seen him, not in the daylight, not in safety, but in chaos under fire, his face turning toward hers with a kind of calm that burned itself into her memory. He had mouthed something she hadn't understood or maybe hadn't wanted to. And then he was gone, officially written off as unrecoverable. But she never accepted that. She never could. And now here she was, anchored to a mission that drew her back to the same ground where his shadow still lived. The radio crackled again. Clear, move forward. The convoy jolted back to life. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The tapping boot soldier caught her eye just for a second. His brow furrowed as if to ask something he didn't have words for. She looked away. Sometimes silence was safer. Hours passed in fragments, checkpoints, hushed commands, the steady rhythm of wheels over broken roads. When they finally reached the staging ground, the trucks fanned out, headlights cutting into the darkness like thin blades. Orders came quick and clipped. Perimeter teams spread, snipers climbed, comms tested. She moved without hesitation, muscle memory guiding her. but inside the drumbeat grew louder. She crouched at her assigned post, the second perimeter. The earth smelled of dust and old rain. The night carried a low wind that tugged at her hair beneath her helmet. She adjusted her scope, scanning the ridgelines, the abandoned structures in the distance. Nothing moved. Not yet. She should have felt steady. This was what she trained for, what she was trusted to hold. But her hands betrayed her, the faintest tremor still lingering in her grip. She pressed them tighter against the rifle. "You good?" The voice in her earpiece startled her. It was him, the soldier with the tapping boot. "Fine," she whispered back. A pause. "You don't sound fine." She wanted to snap back to cut off the line, but his voice had no edge, no judgment, only recognition, as if he had seen this before in himself, in someone else. "I'm here," she said finally. "That's enough." Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It felt like understanding. Time stretched. Minutes became an hour. Every sound became sharper, the distant call of a night bird, the faint groan of shifting metal, the crackle of radios. Her world narrowed to breath and sightlines, to the steady hum of vigilance. And then movement. Her scope caught it first, a shadow slipping along the far ridge, too deliberate to be chance. Her chest tightened. She exhaled, slow, steady, pressing the crosshairs against the blur of motion. But before she could signal, the shadow stilled. For a moment she thought her eyes were betraying her. The figure turned just enough for moonlight to catch. Her heart stopped. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. And yet, the angle of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, it mirrored her memory too perfectly. She blinked hard, forced her hand to steady. "Perimeter contact," she whispered into comms. Static answered, then a clipped voice, "Hold, confirm before engaging." Her scope didn't waver. The figure stood still, half in shadow, as if waiting. Her hand brushed her pocket unconsciously, feeling the folded paper inside. Words she had promised never to forget. Words that tied her to him like a thread stretched across years. Could it be? Her breath shook. For the first time since the mission began, she hesitated. And hesitation, she knew, could break everything. The voice in her ear returned. "What do you see?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Because what she saw was more than a contact, more than a shadow. She saw a possibility. And she wasn't ready to say it aloud. Not yet. Why did the figure linger instead of fading into the night? That was the question circling her mind as she kept her scope locked, breath shallow, finger trembling near the trigger. Every training drill screamed for clarity, confirm, decide, act. But this wasn't clarity. This was chaos in disguise, a shadow pressed against her memory. The ridge was still. The moon carved out shapes in the dust, brittle and sharp. The figure shifted slightly, not forward, not back, just enough to remind her it was real, or at least her eyes wanted to believe it was. "Perimeter, confirm contact," the commander's voice cut through her earpiece. Controlled but edged, the kind of tone that carried the weight of lives depending on her word. Her mouth was dry. She tried to force the syllables, but hesitation rooted her tongue. She swallowed hard. "Unclear," she whispered. Static hummed in response, then silence. She pulled her cheek from the scope for half a second, pressing her palm against her thigh, grounding herself. The folded paper in her pocket felt heavier than the rifle in her hands. Words she'd never let go. Words she had once promised to bring home. Her chest ached. Because what if it really was him? The night shifted again, wind brushing across the field. In the far distance, one of the other teams clicked in, routine check-ins, eyes on their sectors. She knew she should log the sighting properly, call for backup, do what protocol demanded. But protocol had never carried his face. She raised the scope again. The figure had moved lower now, almost crouched against the ridge. Her breath hitched. She adjusted the focus, shadows broke into details. Torn gear, a limp in the left leg. She knew that gait. She knew it as surely as she knew her own reflection. Her chest tightened so hard it hurt. It couldn't be him. He was gone. They had told her that over and over until even her silence had started to believe it. But there he was, or someone wearing his ghost. Second perimeter, another voice crackled in. The soldier with the tapping boot, steady even now. You've been quiet too long, report. She closed her eyes, just for a second. I see, her voice faltered. I see something I can't explain. A pause, then softer. Then don't explain, just hold. It steadied her, enough to breathe again. Enough to let the doubt settle instead of shatter her. The figure on the ridge didn't advance, didn't retreat, just stayed there, suspended between presence and memory, between her rifle sight and her folded paper. The night stretched on. Minutes ticked like hours. Sweat traced her spine despite the cold. She could feel every beat of her pulse in her fingertips. And then movement elsewhere. A flash of light, faint but unmistakable from the far eastern line. A signal or something worse. Her comms lit up. Another team had contact. Orders snapped sharp across channels, voices rising, boots shifting, the operation surging alive around her. But her scope stayed fixed on the ridge, on him. For one dangerous second she thought about breaking position, about crossing the line, running into that dark space, finding out the truth for herself. But the weight of her role anchored her down. Anchor second perimeter. Hold the line. Don't break. She clenched her jaw. Because if she moved, she risked everything. Not just herself, but everyone around her. Her voice cracked through the comms, steadier than she felt. Second perimeter holding. No breach confirmed. It was the closest to truth she could offer. The others moved. Gunfire in the distance, muffled by terrain. Commands overlapping, reports filtering in. The mission was unfolding at speed. But she stayed locked on the ridge, on the shadow that carried a face only she could recognize. The longer she watched, the more unbearable the silence between them became. Finally, unable to stop herself, she whispered, not into the comms, not for anyone else, just for the night to hear. If it's you, don't disappear again. Her voice trembled as much as her hands. And the figure, whether flesh or ghost, shifted once more. This time it wasn't random. This time it was deliberate. A slow, almost imperceptible lift of the head, turning just enough as though hearing her. Her breath caught, her heart pounded. But before she could move, before she could know, a flare burst over the eastern sky, painting the ridge in harsh, fleeting light. And in that blinding second, he was gone. Just dust, just shadow. Her chest collapsed inward. She pressed her forehead against the rifle, eyes burning. And for the first time in years, she didn't know if she had seen him at all, or only the memory of what she refused to let die. Why did the next step feel heavier than the last? Every movement through the ruins pressed against her muscles, her mind, her very soul. Dawn had begun its slow creep across the horizon, painting dust and rubble in gold and gray, but the light did nothing to ease the tension crawling through her chest. She had held the line all night. She had kept the perimeter, followed orders, watched shadows, but something invisible now followed her as closely as the enemy ever could. The ridge she had watched, memorized every detail of, was empty. No figure remained. The memory of him, or what she thought she had seen, clung to her like a second skin. She could still feel the brush of his gaze, the subtle tilt of his head. And yet the world insisted he was gone, officially gone, written off. An impossible truth pressed against the one thing she knew she could abandon, the mission. She inhaled, forcing herself forward, one step at a time, boots scraping against broken stone, rifle pressing into her shoulder like an extension of herself. The younger soldier followed at a careful distance, tapping his foot in a nervous rhythm that made her grit her teeth. Not now, she told herself. Focus. But her thoughts refused to obey. They wandered backward to letters folded neatly in her pocket, words she had written before she ever thought she might see him again, words she had never sent, words she had never allowed herself to speak aloud. They were not just letters, they were promises, anchors of her soul, reminders that there was a reason she had survived when he had not. She could not lose that anchor now, even as the mission demanded her full attention. The team moved in a pattern practiced until it was instinct. East flank, west flank, Overwatch holding center. Her eyes swept every window, every broken doorway, every line of sight that could hide an enemy. Dust rose with each careful footstep, drifting into the early light, glittering like tiny ghosts. The tapping boot soldier whispered again, voice trembling but steady. "Do you ever wonder if people remember us only when it's convenient?" She swallowed, feeling the words scrape raw against her throat. This was a question she had asked herself too many times. Whether the people she'd saved, the people she'd left behind, the people who had seen her tremble, if they would ever understand what it cost to survive. She shook her head minutely, replying softly, "Not everyone will, but some do, that's enough." His breath hitched, or maybe it was her imagination. They moved again, careful, silent except for the occasional murmur in the comms. Every sound felt amplified in the morning air, every shadow a potential threat, every heartbeat a warning. The eastern building loomed closer now, its walls pockmarked, windows shattered, but the signal mast inside pulsed faint red light through the cracks. The objective, the reason they had been sent into this labyrinth of dust and ghosts. She lowered herself behind a broken wall, rifle aimed, scope steady. The others fanned around her, silent, disciplined, everyone carrying their own private weight. She could feel the young soldier behind her shifting, unease in every motion. She leaned back just enough to catch his eye, offering the faintest of nods. Small gestures could carry more than words sometimes. "Anchor point established," she murmured into comms. The reply was immediate. "Copy. Begin infiltration when ready." She exhaled. Ready? She was never ready, not for this, not for what might lie inside, not for the echo of what she thought she had seen. Inside the building, shadows pooled in corners. Dust motes danced in weak streams of light filtering through broken glass. Every step she took echoed faintly against the stone floors. She counted her breaths, controlled them. Finger near trigger, not yet pressing. The younger soldier moved just behind her, careful not to step on debris. His whispered comments were rare, almost reluctant. "Feels wrong," he said. She didn't respond immediately. Some feelings could not be reassured. Instead, she scanned, moving slowly, every movement deliberate. The pulse of the mast was faint but constant, a reminder of why they were here. She felt eyes on her again. Not human, not her team, something else, something she couldn't place. Her body stiffened, muscle memory overriding thought. The floor creaked. She froze, held her breath. Nothing. But the weight of the unknown pressed in. Hours became minutes, minutes became seconds. The interior of the building was a labyrinth of rooms, each holding the faint scent of dust, metal, and something else, something human. She wondered who had lived here before, who had touched these walls, who had fled and never returned. Her mind flickered again to the letters in her pocket. She wanted to unfold them, to read them, to remind herself why she endured this relentless discipline of mind and body. But she didn't. She pressed on. The mission demanded action, and hesitation could cost lives. The masked room was finally in sight. Faint red light pulsed through broken door frames. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the light. She signaled the team, and they moved as one, careful, precise, synchronized. But something shifted in her chest, an awareness she couldn't ignore. Not everyone in the building was enemy. There were traces of movement, signs of life that didn't belong. She hesitated, scanning more carefully. A small figure slipped into shadow, childlike, barely visible. Her breath caught. She raised the rifle slightly, scope narrowing but didn't fire. Orders were clear, yet instinct screamed. The young soldier whispered, "Did you see that?" She nodded minutely. "I did. Hold, do not engage." The pause stretched unbearably. She could feel the tension in the air, like a wire pulled tight. Every fiber of her being screamed to act, to intervene, to protect, to correct mistakes. But the mission was larger than immediate impulses. Still, the presence of life, of innocence in the shadow of danger, struck her harder than any rifle shot ever could. The mast pulsed faster now, signals bouncing off satellites somewhere far away, feeding something bigger than herself, bigger than the team, bigger than the building itself. She felt the weight of it, the gravity of their presence in this moment. Her hands trembled again, but she pressed them still. Anchor, hold, focus. A sudden shift in the shadows, the faintest movement, and she froze. The memory of him, of the figure on the ridge, surged back. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to focus on reality. Not memory, not ghost, not hope, reality. But reality was cruelly indistinct. Her partner tapped lightly on her shoulder, whispering, "You okay?" She exhaled slowly, lowering her weapon just a fraction. "I am," she said, but the lie wasn't for him. It wasn't even for the mission. It was for herself. She needed herself to believe she could continue. Because if she faltered now, if she allowed herself to unravel, the mission would fail, and more lives than hers would pay the price. The red pulse of the mast finally dominated the room. Every team member assumed position. Orders repeated quietly but urgently over comms. The anchor point had to hold. She pressed herself flat against the floor, sightline steady, pulse racing with controlled restraint. Then almost imperceptibly a sound. Footsteps. Not the team, not enemy, somewhere else deeper in the building. Her scope swung toward it. The silhouette was human but small, fragile, and for one heart-stopping instant her breath caught. The figure, it reminded her again of him. Not his face exactly, but his manner, his hesitant, careful motion. Her hands trembled, her heart surged. And she realized with sudden clarity why she had carried the letters all these years, why she had never let them go. Because whatever this was, memory or truth, it demanded that she see it, that she feel it, that she confront the silence she had carried for so long. The moment stretched, the world held its breath with her. And then the figure vanished into shadow again. She pressed her cheek to the rifle, eyes burning. The mission was still alive, but so was something else, a truth she might never fully grasp, yet could never leave behind. And for the first time she allowed herself a single silent vow. No matter what she would endure, she would hold the line, she would see this through. Even if the ghost of him never returned. Why does the last step always feel heavier than the first? Dawn had fully broken now, pale light spilling across the broken terrain like reluctant truth. The team moved carefully, methodical, each member aware that the mission's final stretch demanded perfection. Dust hung in the air, glittering faintly in the morning sun, a ghostly reminder of every decision made in darkness. She pressed herself against the low wall of a crumbled building, eyes scanning every line of sight. Every muscle was coiled tight, every breath measured, every heartbeat echoing in her chest. The mast, the objective, was just ahead, pulsing faint red through shattered windows. She had carried this moment for hours, for days, for years, even if no one knew. The tapping boots soldier leaned close, whispering, "Ready." Her lips pressed together, she nodded. Words would betray her. Orders, movement, silence, these were her only language now. Inside, the massed room was a labyrinth of wires, screens, and metal. A faint hum thrummed in the air, almost like a heartbeat. She could feel it reverberate through her chest, through her bones. She crouched at the doorway, rifle steady, scope sweeping, eyes sharp. Every shadow held weight. Every sound carried meaning. And then she saw it. A figure crouched in the far corner. Not the enemy, not her team, but a lone silhouette, small, careful, human. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. For a single heartbeat, the world shrank to that figure. Every memory she had tried to bury, every letter folded in her pocket, every vow she had whispered in the dark, all of it coalesced in this impossible, fragile presence. She exhaled slowly, hand brushing the rifle just enough to steady herself. The figure shifted slightly, revealing a face she could almost recognize. It wasn't him, not exactly, but the posture, the hesitation, the careful awareness of danger, it mirrored him too perfectly. Her chest ached. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. Reality, not memory. Mission, not longing. Anchor confirmed, she whispered into comms. The team moved in sync, clearing the room, securing the mast. Every step deliberate, every breath controlled. She felt the tension pressing through her, threatening to break her discipline, her focus, her resolve. But she pressed on. The figure in the corner shifted again, this time making eye contact. A faint nod, almost imperceptible, recognition, understanding, relief. And she realized something profound. Sometimes connection didn't require words. Sometimes survival didn't demand explanation. Sometimes the weight you carried alone was shared simply through presence. Orders snapped over comms. Objective secured, begin extraction. Her knees ached. Her hands trembled faintly, but she forced the rifle down, lowering it slowly. She exhaled, long and steady, letting the tension bleed out into the quiet hum of the mast. The team exfiltrated carefully, weaving through rubble and debris, every step echoing against the empty buildings. She stayed at the rear, watching, ensuring the perimeter remained intact. Each step forward reminded her of the cost, the lives she had seen, the faces she had carried, the promises she had made. She thought of the letters in her pocket. She unfolded one, letting the paper catch the pale sunlight. The words were faded but sharp, promises she had never sent, thoughts she had never spoken, feelings she had never allowed herself to voice. She read them silently, feeling the weight of every unspoken truth. And she understood something she had never admitted. Strength wasn't measured in victories. It was measured in endurance, in the quiet moments where you chose to act even when the world seemed to demand silence, in carrying more than anyone else could see and still stepping forward. The extraction point loomed ahead. Vehicles waited, engines humming softly, ready to carry them home. She stepped forward, rifle slung, heart heavy but steady. She glanced back one last time at the mast, at the rooms they had cleared, at the shadows that had haunted her all night. Her partner tapped her shoulder lightly, a silent acknowledgement of everything endured. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. And for a fleeting second, she allowed herself to feel it: pride, relief, connection. But also a twinge of sorrow for those who hadn't made it, and for the parts of herself she had left behind in shadows. The vehicle doors closed. Engines hummed. She leaned back, letting the vibration travel through her, steadying her breath. Outside, the sun rose higher, bathing the world in light. She closed her eyes, letting it wash over her, feeling the tremor inside her settle, not gone but softened, acknowledged, carried. In that moment she realized the truth she had carried all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Sometimes courage isn't loud, it is quiet, patient, steadfast, unseen but undeniable. She opened her eyes as the convoy rolled forward, leaving behind the ruins, the mast, the shadows. The past would follow her as it always would, but she carried it differently now. Not as a burden, but as proof of resilience, as testament to endurance, as reminder that even in silence, action speaks volumes. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to exhale fully. The wind brushed her face, carrying dust and the faint scent of hope. The hum of engines, the rhythm of movement, the warmth of the sun, they were small, quiet affirmations of life. Her gaze lifted to the horizon. She did not know what waited for her beyond this moment. She did not know if she would ever find closure for all the memories, the promises, the tremors she carried inside. But she knew this. She had endured. She had acted when it mattered. She had held herself steady when everything around her demanded collapse. And that, she understood, was enough. The world stretched out before her, vast, unknowable, and still full of possibility. And she, trembling yet steadfast, moved forward into it, carrying her truth like armor and her silent dignity like a shield.